All right, thanks. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Maps Are Dead with Mike D. Man, super excited to have an old friend, Skogen Sprang. Skogen, man, thanks for making time for me today. Super grateful that you're able to kind of jump on here.
Yeah, appreciate it, Mike. Love to get a chance to chat with you.
We now, okay, I'm gonna actually, I'm like Rick, my assistant. I'm like, hey, so since October 2022, Skog, you've been basically the Freeski Sport Director for USA Ski and Snowboard. You kind of lead the national free ski programs, other athletic development. But I was like, man, like these awards, dude, like 2021 US Ski and Snowboard Coach of the Year, International Free Skiing Coach of the Year, US Olympic and Paralympic Committee's National Coach of the Year in 2014. I mean, you've been a pro skier. So you've kind of done both sides, right? You did the X Games, and now you're like deep on the coaching side of the house, right? You're kind of deep in the system.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel very fortunate to, have kind of had the timeline that I've had, and I've been able to, be involved with so many pieces of the sport, kind of from the beginning and where it
Yeah.
started, and then where it's going. So from the beginning of the sport side of things as an athlete, but then as it, the first games for slopestyle and halfpipe in 2014, and
Yep.
being able to, lead those teams there, had amazing athletes that had amazing success and like kind of beyond our wildest dreams. And then, just continuing on now, three Olympics later, going into the
Yeah.
fourth one, and I, wild to see what these guys are doing on snow.
Yeah,
And
it's nuts. I got to see you guys up close, up at Copper last season. I was like, man, it's insane. To see it in person too. It's a whole different thing. It's bizarre.
yeah, very
Part
cool.
of part of the conversation and part of so we're going to dive into your strengths, and you and I have done strengths before in the past, but we pulled your results. We've got achiever, strategic, a relator, learner, and individualization. So again, strategic, achiever, strategic, learner, relator, individualization. Ideation's in the mix too. We know somewhere in your top 5 and 6. But but the reason why I wanted to talk to you, two things. One is we talk to athletes quite a bit as well as coaches, but there's something about the coach conversation, and you've been an athlete, and you were in the early days of the sport, and now you're actually coaching, and you have coaches below you. So you're director of like the sport in general. And so there's different evolution. So what I want to talk to you a little bit as we kind of dive in today is we'll talk about which parts of your brain do you think fired when you were an athlete yourself? And then when you make that pivot, because a lot of times athletes will become coaches, but not everyone makes that transition well. And I'm sure you've seen it. People that thought they were going to go into coaching and knowing how to perform and coaching someone else to perform aren't the same things. Also, you're somebody who has to deal with, it's so interesting, not just the true leadership and project management. You guys are 6 months out from qualifiers for the 2026 Olympics in Italy. I'm in Italy right now, and so everybody here started to talk about it. It's up near Torino, isn't it? It's up north someplace
Yeah,
in
our
February.
events are in Livigno,
Okay,
but it is near there. Yeah, so it's
yeah,
Milan Cortina, but then
nice.
all the freestyle events are in Livigno.
And so you guys are less than, I mean, it's June now, so you guys are less than what, 4 or 5 months away from that space. So, but when you think about themes like achiever, strategic, relator, learner, individualization, for me, achiever is all about hard work. It's getting things done. It's going again, spending the hours, really putting in the time. Strategic is problem solving at the highest level of quickly being able to be responsive and solve and find roadblocks, some ways around roadblocks. Relator is all about pulling a team together, authentic partners that you like to work with. Learners like self-education. Individualization is about spotting the nuance, like the little thing that'll make a difference, something to make you unique. When you're an athlete and you're thinking about how the sport's starting, and you're getting started, and you guys are just diving into this, when you think about your strengths, what set you apart? What made you successful and you felt like really set your skiing apart in the early days as an athlete?
I had a pretty untraditional background for most skiers, kind of coming up. I was very self-taught, and I learned a lot of it on my own. I never really was on a ski team. I skied with my brother and my dad, and he started snowboarding early on in the 80s,
Nice.
and I was a big skateboarder from growing up around San Francisco, and so I was always brought up with that skateboard mentality of creativity and individualization as far as like doing unique things. And so that one of the biggest pieces that I think I still look at, but as an athlete, it was looking at the sport and finding where I could be unique and what I could bring to the sport that was
Yeah.
different and not just doing the same thing as everybody else. And that has still to this day, paid
Yeah.
off for me. And I have, some people come up and tell me things about certain tricks I did or whatever, but just bringing things in a creative way and kind of finding those gaps um, that aren't being
Yeah.
used. And even with coaching, that has a lot of to do with the judging style of things. If you're
Yeah.
bringing something new to the table, it stands out. If you're doing the same exact tricks as everybody else, you're kind of uh, comparable to all that. If you're doing something that really stands out, that's when you jump up ahead and can jump into those podium spots. Of course, everything else needs to match, but
Yeah. Is it harder today? Because on one level, you're having come up with innovation on your own, right? I mean, obviously there were people shooting videos of things, but it's not like it is today, where you have endless streams of content going on, and so guys and girls are learning their tricks by watching others, and so they can be a little too similar, and so you think, oh well, there'll be a lot of inspiration, but they can almost be like too much. How is it different now? Is it more difficult today for athletes to find ways to be innovative, or do you meet athletes and coaches even that you're like, they just see something that others don't see?
sure, it's definitely more difficult because so much has been done, but then at
Yeah,
the same time, they're doing such crazy things that there's more opportunities out there. The
yeah,
courses and the features they're hitting are different, and so, but in the same light, as soon as someone does something new, you can really see how much easier it is to copy it. And so that's a really, it's an interesting piece because even with everything that's been done so far, um, it can be really difficult and it's risky to do something new.
yeah,
And then, and you see this kind of shelf life of it lasting for a couple years. And then once it's been done, people see how to do it. The next generation of kids just automatically expects that that's just what you do,
yeah,
especially with some of these bigger spins. Guys would have thought an 1800 was impossible 5, 6 years ago.
yeah,
All of a sudden, the next generation of kids now are, yeah, that's just what you do, right? And so their brain is
yeah.
just accepting of that and looking to the next piece. So,
Do you remember one of your first tricks that you were like, it redefined what your brain thought was possible for you?
sure. I was for me, it was like spinning off axis and like really getting
Okay.
into these um, off axis kind of diagonal,
Yeah.
untraditional ways to spin. And, I've been very lucky. I can kind of have a very visual mind, so I can see and feel,
Yeah.
how it's gonna go. But I didn't know if that's really how it would go. And
But
so I
in
had
that
to
world
kind
in
of
your head, it
just
works.
trust it and say, hey, I'm gonna just wing, try this
Hmm.
thing and see what happens. And it went pretty well, and I kind of was able to build on that and keep evolving and
Yeah.
keep getting better and better and better. And um, I mean,
Yeah.
one of my I had a few moments that say like at X Games, for instance, in 2000, it was like the second X Games ever at Mount Snow, and there's a big air, and I'm basically nobody at this time. I qualified in. There's all these other names that I'm looking up to,
Yeah.
and I had never really done this one trick to 720. It was like a switch rodeo 720, so it's off
Okay.
axis. Um, and at that time, it doesn't sound like much these days, but at that time, it was a new trick, and I was able to put it down basically for the first time in the contest, and that's what got me kind of a guy won silver medal in that,
Got you
and
noticed too.
helped my career. But just the kind of rolling the dice and yeah, trying to land that, and then being able to do that in the moment was still such a
Yeah.
rewarding.
Where does that resilience come from? Where does that a belief that, you know what? the attempt is worth it. I'll figure it out. Versus I've really got, man, what if it doesn't work? Do you find that just comes from a natural place for you?
I think it does, you have to, as silly as it might sound, you have to kind of not be worried about the result.
Hmm.
And a lot of our guys, even all the great results they have, they do it like for themselves, kind of competing against themselves. And I think a lot of action sports could kind of relate to that, but
Yeah.
you're like pushing the sport and innovation and kind of doing a personal best. And
Yeah.
then you see where that lands you, right? And so you got to be willing to kind of roll the dice and not be worried about the result that much and just uh yeah, more focused on doing it for yourself and knowing that if you
Yeah.
don't do it that you know what that hopefully there'll be another time and you'll keep
Yeah.
working at it and
But
uh
would you say that to me, Scott, that sounds like, even as I think about your sport, I feel like that's kind of a key to it, right? Because you guys were doing this for yourselves. Like before the X Games, before this is now a world-renowned sport that's one of the big draws of the Olympics. Everyone wants to see. It was you guys doing crazy tricks in parks where they didn't even want you, right? I think I mean, it was kind of do you feel like, because in my mind, I make up the story that sets the sport apart, is that part of the thing for athletes is that at the core, the initiation of the sport to the level it is now was based on guys who were like, we're doing it for us, and we're
yeah.
excited you're interested, but we're doing it for us. How do you keep that as a core in a world where people are going, well, I've got to do it for, it's a judged sport, so, and there's now regulations and rules, and it's a whole thing, right? How do you maintain that essence of, look, to be successful, you really got to let go of what is the measure for the first measure has to be you.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, right? And we're very lucky to kind of have that culture within the sport. And but
Mm-hmm.
I think especially on our team, um, they're really pushing each other between the athletes and pushing that innovation and progression. And it, there's a few elements that you have to tick the boxes on. Of
Yeah.
course,
Yep.
execution. You got to have perfect landings.
Yep.
You gotta go to the sweet spot. You gotta go off the end of the rail. There's a few things you
Yep.
gotta tick the boxes for the judges, but there is such a big risk factor, and as far as just trying new tricks too, you don't know if
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna score well or not, and you kind of have to be willing to um, give it a
Take a
shot
chance.
and see.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's certain times to risk more and there's certain times to risk less, but it's really part of the culture of the sport and kind of supporting each other
Mm.
um, within the athletes, and even it's pretty special between the countries too. Really applauding people that
Yeah.
are going for new innovative things.
Yeah.
You kind of have that peer support
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
again, there's a time and a place to risk things more and risk things less, but
Yep.
it's very much part of the culture.
Getting to be with you guys that one weekend, I just remember what you said, what you're describing is that it was a wholly different experience to realize that while they're competing, your teammate is your competitor. But there is a level of when someone lands and does something innovative, it changes the bar for everyone. And everyone feels the benefit of that bar going up. Where we're like, that wasn't me, but man, the fact that you just did that somehow makes it more accessible. And it helps us understand what the judges are looking for. And it's opening doors for us to collaborate and learn from each other in some ways. And it is a different environment. I've worked with other teams, and it doesn't feel the same. That collaboration is something that seems unique and special to what's going on for the team right now in the sport.
Yeah, and there's a balance, and not every athlete's the same, and they're
Sure.
all very competitive,
Yeah.
but at the same time, they're really good people, which is cool and makes it fun for the sport. But like,
Yeah.
if another guy lands this amazing run or trick, and they're such humble athletes, which is so impressive, I think, because they're also, they're so
Yeah.
successful and so
Yep.
many of them are, such high level athletes, but they are, you know, having the ability to congratulate that person and be stoked for them and be like, man,
Yeah.
you beat me. That was better than my run, and that was insane and great job. And
Yeah.
now, we're gonna come out. I'll keep working and
Yeah.
come up with something
So
new or do better next week
you've
and come
raised the
out and
bar
try to
for,
beat you
yeah,
again.
you've raised the bar for me in some ways.
And so it's at any given day, a lot,
Yeah.
there's quite a few different people that can win. And so understanding that it's, maybe not the end all
Yeah.
be all that day. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, trying to look at the bigger picture of the sport.
Sko, when you make the transition from athlete to coach in that first phase, what was something that surprised you? That you, when you look back on that and you think about the transition from that space, in some ways, even as you're describing it, in some ways, you guys are all coaching each other. Like you're coaching each other on your example. So was it just a natural progression into coach when you kind of shift to, especially when the sport becomes more solidified and you get offered the role to play, to begin to play coach in that role? Was there things that you're like, these are things that I had to navigate that was a mindset shift for me in going from athlete to coach?
There definitely was a lot of things I had to kind of work on, and that I really like getting better at things. That's part of the fun, right? But
Yeah.
I was naturally, pretty good at coaching. I was never the best guy, which I think
Mm.
helped. I've learned a lot of things the wrong way too, and I know what not to do, which helps a lot. I'm not
That's
just
good.
perfect.
And you've lived through it. You've learned not to do,
Sure.
but and you've survived.
I I have I have personal mental tendencies that are not good, and so I know exactly what those pitfalls can be
Mhm.
and
Sure.
kind of what I should do to work through
Yep.
them. It doesn't always
Yep.
work for me,
Yeah.
but I can understand it from that perspective. And so really like being empathetic and putting yourself in the shoes of that athlete and trying to understand from their perspective was always, I think, a strength of that I had. And yeah, learning things the hard way. I always was that guy. I had to work
Yeah.
extra hard. I was kind of in that middle range where I didn't wasn't able to just do it off talent. I had to really keep trying and trying and
Hmm.
trying and bang my head against the wall and
Yep.
learn the hard way. And then also just being through some really tough experiences with injuries and stuff that
Yep.
um, teach you about yourself. And I've
Yeah.
learned from being in the coaching role that you need to really understand yourself in order
Mm.
to be able to help others. And so
Yeah.
that is a blessing in disguise, like by being through some really difficult injuries and kind of being at the top and having it ripped away and down to
Hmm.
the bottom and building back up. And it's like you really learn about yourself. And that's such kind of important piece, I believe, for being a coach and being confident with yourself and then trying to um, yeah,
Yeah.
communicate with all these individuals. And a lot of it, it is a fun, we're lucky in our sport where I've been doing a lot of multi-sport, coaching education, and it seems there's a quite a bit of a movement towards some of the techniques that I think action sports and skiing and
Mm.
snowboarding have kind of naturally used for a long time. And
Yeah.
with communicating, kind of meeting the athletes halfway,
Yep.
going through that learning process with them, and kind of developing and like creating something together rather than that
Yeah.
instructive and kind of disciplinary role.
Yeah. It's such a different approach. One of we just did a Gallup's. I just did a white paper with 3 doctors from Mizzou Pacific University and 2 from the University of Minnesota, and we analyzed 1,600 athletic results. Clifton Strength's top 5, from everything from some of the Olympic folks to college, professional baseball. And what was interesting is that in the rank and file of Clifton Strengths and the general population, restorative, which is very similar to strategic and arranger in there, restorative for the general population is like 15th, like middle of the pile. But we found that within the top 5 of the highest performing athletes, Restorative, along with competition, almost always ends up being in the top 5. And one of the takeaways for the white paper is that many high-performing athletes often see athletic performance as problem solving, which is what strategic and learner in your profile, individualization, does. But what's interesting is when we pulled out our group of coaches, most of them ended up with achiever, responsibility, and belief, which is much more trust the process. And so, which interestingly enough, because again, we weren't doing just, free ski and snowboard and things like that. We were doing a much broader sample. And so the takeaway was that coaches would need to navigate the fact that just going for fitness levels or technique would be to leave development off the table for athletes, because at its core, most athletes see athletic performance as athletic problem solving. And so when I hear you talk about the key of being like, hey, coaches that can meet the athlete part way, is I would say, just from our research, that would actually serve them best. Because athletes are looking for new and innovative ways to solve problems every time they leave start. And finding new ways to problem solve.
That one really, resonates with me. I love problem solving. It's like in the moment, under pressure, trying to figure out the strategy and like, what do I do and how do I fix, or, how do I figure this out? And whether that's in the moment or big picture, but I think our sport's so unique with like adaptability. There's so much on the fly adaptability. I know, talking to other coaches, we explain like, yeah, I might have an athlete in the start gate that literally changes a trick they're going to do in their run 30 seconds before they drop in. Or they might mess up a trick midway, and we have a plan B where it's like if you land 180 short and you're backwards instead of forwards, all of a sudden you're improvising at that point. And we don't have set routines, so you all of a sudden do improvise. But for some coaches, they go, wait, someone might change their
so true
their trick.
And I've talked to a couple
right at the start.
And I've talked to a couple of your coaches about how they talk their athletes. Like you're having a conversation live at the start and changing the entire plan based on a run that just happened 3 minutes before.
I mean, they're in the 2022 Olympics. We're at the top of the big air jump, and big air seems simple because you're doing one trick. You did 2 tricks out of 3 jumps, right?
Okay.
Seems less complicated than slopestyle, perhaps. All of a sudden, though, everything changed. You don't land your first jump. All of a sudden, you land a second jump. You need a second score to add, and we're at the top of the ramp in the Olympics with a third jump, and they're going, what do I do? Do I do this trick? Or do I do this trick?
It's with a little more.
Or do I do this one big, and it's like in the moment going, I think, talking it through with them and figuring it out. And, it's so rewarding to, hopefully land on the right trick. And in one instance we did, and, and that person got a medal, and on another instant they didn't, but it's just such a challenging but fun, process to go through with those athletes. And, and that's where you're, kind of working backwards through it, talking to them, talking about their strengths, like what they're good at, what are they going to be able to do under pressure to execute that trick perfectly that's going to score, risk, reward. What do they want to get out of it at the end of the day? Like, are they okay if they take this risk, to understand that might really jeopardize their result? Do we want to play it safe? Do we want to go for the gold? Like, there's so many things happening in the moment there.
Yeah, and that's the fascinating, having talked to some of your coaches, that was the fascinating part, was watching them figure out how the coach that they needed to be during training and travel is a different set completely than being a resource at start in the moment. Because it required being able to see the athlete's strengths and know how to be a resource to the athlete's problem solving but also going, this athlete has to choose it, because they don't have to execute it. It's a creative expression of that. We're going, okay, does this athlete need to be just given, well, here's the facts, pick what you trust, or do they need to express and talk it out because they have communication and they really need to express it? Or do they need to lay out all the problems and have you give them feedback and they pick one? Like, the coach knowing how each athlete is different and the coach knowing what it brings up in them and how to show up in that moment. And so the
Yeah.
coach going, okay, I know who I'm going to be, this athlete, and that was fun, was watching Ryan and some of the others be able to be like, this athlete needs a different thing than this athlete does right now. I'm still me, but I actually don't need to offer this. I need to offer this. And being able to kind of see that is a whole different, it's different than a team sport where, okay, I'm dealing with a holistic group response that are parts, and I need to be the stabilizing force. You've literally got to be different. Every person stands to the line in some ways.
For sure, there's so much individualization between the athletes, and
Yeah.
it comes from learning with them too, right? You kind of got to go through some of these tough experiences, and maybe you get it wrong once or twice before, and then you really do that, the reflection piece and kind of debriefing and talk it through with those athletes, and what did you like, what didn't you like what went wrong for you.
Yeah.
Here's how I felt, and you really kind of like explore that all together. So when you get it right, it feels amazing, but hopefully you've done enough kind of practice along the way to where when you're hitting those really big moments, you've already got a bit of an idea, what those guys are looking for. And sometimes it even changes in the moment, and even what they think they need at some point, might not be what they need. And you do got to tweak it and say, hey, I don't think that's the move.
And be able to call it out and be able to say that.
There can be a time to do that too, which is, tricky, but saying, hey, I really think this is the move.
Yeah.
I know you really want to do X, Y, and Z, but look at it this way. And so there's so many, it's part of the fun. It's always different, always changing.
Yeah, it's such, and even again, I'm trying to get people to think about quitting their jobs. They're making changes in their life. And I'm talking to people, everything from career changes to people who are starting careers. And there's a whole element of creativity. And part of the conversation I'm having is, guess what? Your college degree doesn't go the places you think it goes. The job track you're on doesn't go the way you think it goes. And what I love about what you're describing is you're literally living in, your sport is a context of, guess what? In a world where you can't possibly know every variable, you can't possibly know how the forces of gravity are going to act on you, or the type of snow, it's going to be harder than you think or softer than you think. And so the ability to be responsive, you can't map to that. You have to simply be ready. Is that resilience ends up being the answer, and building in a level of resilience to be responsive ends up being, in a world that can't be mapped, you have to be resilient over being resistant. Going, look, I have options, and these are the choices that seem the best, and I'll grab what will work in the moment as best I can, it seems to me.
Totally. And it's so, you got to trusting that you're gonna be ready for that moment. And there's no real way to train for that a lot of time. You just have to trust that you've done the preparation and that your instincts are gonna lead you the right way. And
and I think that trust, one of the things, I always say trust and confidence are things you remember, not things you create. And so I think part of even the coach's role is being able to be mirrors back. Like, listen, you can be resilient because we've seen you do this many times. We've seen when the conditions go to crap, you actually pulled this out when we were in France and did this, and this. Or when we were in Argentina and this happened, you did this.
Yeah.
The ability to kind of reflect so that they can remember the confidence. They can remember and have trust in their resilience. And I think that's the thing people forget sometimes, that we get so excited when things don't fall apart that we forget to remember what we overcame, so we can be like, look, this thing we're dealing with is part of a resilient system. But I think, even thinking about you though, Skogen, your role now, because you're now sitting higher. You're not just a coach now. You're overseeing the system, and you're in a place where, look, you want medals, but to be like, we're medal hungry, let's only make sure we focus in on certain things. It doesn't work that way. I talk to athletes all the time who are like, I want hits, but if all they focus on is hits in baseball, that's a nightmare. It doesn't work. It's about them being relaxed. It's about them doing their process. It's about them actually not overthinking it, them letting their bodies do what they know, not focusing on the hit or the pitch, and not even focusing on strikes when they're striking out. How do you find the challenge of going, I have to create a system that's resilient? What part of, when you think about you're hardworking, achiever, strategic, relator, learner, individualization, what part, how do you build into a system that has to be responsive, but also has to serve a whole bunch of athletes traveling internationally, making calls about who's making teams, who's getting spots, like all these different things, like resources and investment and effort. What have you had to tap into to make a system work when you can't, when the output is supposed to be medals and results, but wouldn't serve you well, I would have to believe, to just focus in on that.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think, it's really that process oriented mindset and like just do it, like excellence kind of every day in like
Mm,
the little things, trying to do everything like really well all the time. And but
yeah.
that you kind of got to zoom out and look at the big picture, but then really
Hmm.
and identify what pieces, you need to do in order
Yeah.
to get to this goal, but then kind of zooming back in on that really like daily process and just doing all the little things right. And and the other thing is enjoying it. A lot of our big piece for our team is like the
Mm,
why. Like, why are we here doing
yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Do we like it?
Yeah.
Do- If you don't like it, then you probably don't shouldn't be doing
Yeah.
this, right? So it's like why are we here putting in all the work?
Yeah.
Why are you here scaring yourself every single day, going upside down 3 times over this 75-foot jump? Of course
And
it's
it's a long
scary, but
season, and
at the end
you
of the
guys
day,
it's a slog, man. Too. You guys, I mean,
you,
there's always snow in the world somewhere. So like, you guys are on the road a lot.
yeah, 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 and you gotta enjoy that. You gotta enjoy the travel. You gotta enjoy the
Mm,
process of like getting there. And so that's a big piece is, um, kind of remembering that. And it's easy just to say fun also. And not every we have super competitive athletes and that I don't want to have
hmm.
fun. I want to
Yeah.
win.
Sure.
And that's
Sure.
where we kind of come back to it too and look at it again like, well, what is your definition of fun?
Yeah.
Maybe that is different than this other athlete's definition of fun. And if winning is fun for you, then that is
Yeah.
part of the fun. If
Yeah.
if fun is scaring yourself and pushing yourself to the limit every single day, which a lot, that is fun as the end result, it's enjoyable. Or, how do you get joy out of this, what
Yeah.
you're doing? And so you
Yeah.
kind of like understanding that piece for the athletes is a lot of kind of what drives them, I think, in the end. And so,
Yeah.
I think that also can potentially help relieve pressure of that end result goal, knowing that you're like enjoying the process as you go, and that even if ultimately maybe that result at the end isn't exactly what you're aiming for, but that for one, you've tried your hardest and put in
Yeah.
the work and like done your best to get to that and kind of set yourself up to have a shot at it. Um, you gotta, right? You gotta know that you did everything you
Yeah.
can to try to get there. And at that point, it's in a cliche, but controlling what you can control. And
Right.
there's certain things that are out of your control, and so you
Yep.
gotta try and focus in on the things that you can control and
Yeah.
doing the best you can every day. And yeah,
Yeah, it's one of those things when I talk to athletes a lot, I'll ask, one of the things we say, when you have a vision and we set a vision for what you want. So I want to perform at the highest level. And so I want to land, it could be, I'm an athlete. I want a medal at the games. For some, it could simply be, I want to make the cut of making the team, right? It's depending upon where you are in the sport and what you want. And so the result going, hey, I want the vision of that. The reality is, like, here's where I am. And we always say you close the gap. We call it heat, which is habits, experiments, attitude, and time, is that you start from things that are repetitive, that are like habitual and repetitive, that you can control. Of like, it's the baseline in basic health, right? It's sleep, it's exercise, it's nutrition. Those are basic elements that there's a necessary need for those no matter what. In normal life. So like, what's the habits? So what's the repetitive? The experiments, meaning something I do to stretch and learn. An experiment is something done just for the information. It can be a test, it can be a tryout. Attitude is going to be like, what's my mental posture? Oh, I'm a learner in this space, or I'm disciplined, or I'm going to focus on being creative and work on my fear, my courage. And then time, I'm aware that it won't happen immediately. There's a perspective. I give myself timelines and pieces. When you think for yourself of things that you're like, you know what, things that I do, because when I think about your profile, you have elements that are hyper responsive, like strategic and individualization, which is that problem solving, creative, true part where it needs to be learning. In fact, learner gets bored if it had to solve after. If you could solve those complex problems, but once the most complex problems become repetitive in nature, it's like, yeah, it's the same old kind of a thing. What else do I need to learn? So on one level, the achiever part of you will like, hey, what are the foundational elements that are basic that I achieve on, but I still need to be learning and growing. How do you balance that for yourself? Where you're like, this is how I stay fresh, but I know that if we execute as a team at this level, this is the good foundation for us to create the resilience we need to medal. Versus, like, what are the elements that are habits that you say repetitive, and what are the parts where you're like, this is where we need to be pushing because I need to be experimenting and learning, and I want us to be growing.
I get tough question to answer. I try and take, I guess, any opportunity that comes along, and like whether I think that it might be helpful or not, just kind of have an open mind to stuff, and
Yeah.
When there's an opportunity to go, hear from this person or that person on all these different subjects, or like I said,
Yep.
multi-team sport things that maybe
Yeah.
don't relate to skiing at all, or it's
Yeah.
something completely outside the box, or whether it's
Yeah.
anything on mental strength or all
Yeah.
these other pieces, just having an open mind to kind of to try it.
Yeah.
And then if you can relate or pull one little nugget out of there, I kind of think of it as like, then you put it in your back pocket
Yeah.
and you never know when you're going to use it. And a
Yes.
lot of time, it's not like I go implement these changes instantly. I feel like it's just kind of
Yeah.
like collecting this tool bag of little nuggets here and there,
Yeah.
and sure enough, a lot of times something pops up and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
actually, this one thing that I learned that kind of I didn't think was very relevant is actually becoming super useful now. Um, yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if that totally answers
That
your
actually
question,
does.
but
No, it totally
that
does.
I try and just expand, just take it all in, take opportunities. When there's an
Yeah.
opportunity, dive in and try to do it,
Yeah,
and
because your
see what you
resilience,
get out of it.
as I'm sitting here picking through your profile and listening to you talk, part of the gift of what makes you exceptional, I think, of what you do, probably even as an athlete before and then as a coach, is this ability to, you have ideation, we talked about in one of your sets of results, which often pairs up with learner and strategic. It's this idea of, we often say ideation is like an intellectual lint roller. Like new information just kind of sticks to it. And so your ability to have I think the cross-functional, the cross-sport information and pulling in everything from skateboarding to other areas has produced in you this ability to be a multifaceted kind of resource. It's like, hey, I'm not a person who's gonna come in and say, this is how you have to do it. But if you step into this, here's some creative ways of thinking it. If you want to
Yeah,
step into applying some different modalities, well, here's some ways other sports are doing this. And your ability to resource more than be driving and direct allows your athletes and coaches to be as creative as you were in your performance while still going, hey, let's let this creativity and let's let this gathering of information produce the results of results, both in producing great athletes who are healthy, who are mentally resilient while create great performance. Is that being able to kind of bring different pieces together, that learner, strategic, ideation, and individualization seems to pull all this data from your experience and from other coaches and other places within Team USA, and then apply it and say, cool, here's a shopping cart of stuff. Who
yeah.
needs what? You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, no, that totally resonates. And that's like it is. I love finding, how many different ways can you have to get to the same goal,
Yes.
right? So you
Yes.
find one, but then yeah, it's finding all these different pathways, and
Yeah.
and then when you have this unique problem,
Yeah.
how do you find a pathway to still get to that end goal, right? And
Yeah, and using your individualization, even I would say more and more to trying to impart what you naturally do to your coaches in some way. To, because part of what you would do as a coach, I would have to believe with individualization, is you're dealing with athletes who at different ages and different seasons, at times will want to be told. And so helping But your ability to actually ask questions, to be like, well, what are you trying to get at? The individualization part of you asking questions, like get you coaching your coaches to do what you do naturally, I think would probably be really great because you're going to get them to that what do you want part. You know what I mean?
I think yeah, asking the right questions as a coach is one of the biggest, beneficial pieces out there, I think. And then it also helps the athlete, come to the answer on their own, which I
Yeah,
believe also can help kind of that under pressure performance and that
yeah,
learning piece for them. They're actually
right.
learning it versus just being told the answer, right? And so
Yeah,
um, when they're learning it, it sticks to them more. And so
yes,
when they're panicking or their their
yeah,
their mind goes blank and they're under this extreme pressure, they actually are
yeah.
landing on the right answer as well.
And that's the power of like, and that's the benefit of your strategic meeting individualization together. In that strategic can go, oh, just here's the answer. Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? I would do this. But individualization learns, it kind of knows that actually in learner as well, information doesn't create transformation. And so just giving them the answer solves it right now. It doesn't solve the moment when they have to make a call in the air, when they have to feel it in the moment, have to do something different, when they have to be responsive. And so your ability to go, hey, I have ideas of how you might get there, but here's the questions that teaching them to learn while they're gathering the data, and really teaching them about the process of decision making, not just answering in
Yeah,
some ways.
yeah, I know. I mean, and it's interesting, right? It's like when I've my perception of coaching from long ago too is when you first get into it is of course, yeah, you just telling people feedback, right? Telling them
Yeah,
feedback. But
yeah,
the more it's interesting to learn that actually potentially giving them less feedback could actually be better coaching in the end for
yeah,
certain things. Of course, you need feedback on fundamentals and
sure.
technique, right? But at that elite level, potentially, not giving any feedback in a strategic way for
Yep.
periods of time or blocks,
Yeah.
creates it forces them to solve the problem on their own too, which
Yeah.
right helps them learn at that
Yep.
level that is going to actually stick in their brain. And no, it's been really cool to kind of think about things different ways and learn that I guess some of my uh, I guess that like instincts that I wouldn't necessarily think are maybe proper ways to coach are actually things that
You're
actually
actually
do
cutting
work
edge
quite
now.
that actually can work quite well apparently. So it's
Yeah.
really been cool to kind of to learn more about all the different ways our brains work and
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
yeah, and kind of
That,
validate certain things and also yeah, not validate other things, I'm sure.
or let other things go. I mean, I think ultimately, Skog, one of the things that makes your profile so profound to me, and I was like, is that is that it's interesting how collaborative it is. It's naturally collaborative in its environment because it asks questions of the people. You're the individualization strategic part that asks questions. Even as an athlete, when you're asking questions of other athletes, when you're as a coach and asking, one of the things we talk about when we give feedback is we always say, one, ask permission before you give somebody feedback. But two, we always say, any feedback you have, always tie it to the vision of the person you're giving feedback to. Meaning, tie it to their vision, which means they've expressed it enough to say, this is what they're trying to offer, versus you imposing, here's my vision for you on you. You
Right.
naturally, with individualization, bring this collaborative approach. And even as you're approaching Olympics in 26, I can only imagine now, as a senior leader in this space, people going, hey, what's your answer? And there can be pressure on you to go, oh, they want me to come off with this is the roadmap and game plan specifically of how I will get us to these medals. But I think continuing to leverage what you do well, which is gathering your team and saying, hey, I want to solve problems this way. What do you see? This is where we're going. What's the pieces and letting that you will still, when your brain has such creativity that when you've gathered good information, your ability to go, you know what? I think this is the building blocks we're going to put in place. Or, hey, you know what? Let's emphasize this versus not. But I would definitely encourage you that as the pressure ramps up on, hey, how clear is your plans, go? that you gather first before trying to decide. That you do the collaborative thing that you do most naturally and innovatively, because otherwise your brain will feel like it's trying to decide on imperfect information. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. No, I like to gather as much information as possible.
Yeah.
And in a weird way too, almost, yeah, not pull the trigger necessarily until the time
Yeah.
arrives, right? And so
Yeah.
that can, I sometimes I feel like it, maybe it is you're getting close to late, right? Or I think from other
Sure.
people's perspectives, they want these plans in place, but I'm thinking in
Yes.
my mind, I'm still gathering information,
Yep.
and then that adaptability of when
Mm-hmm.
that time hits,
Yep.
I've been going over and over and over all the different scenarios,
Yes.
and I'm going to be able to pull the trigger on the best answer in
And
that
so
moment.
if you're leading me, so here's the thing: if you're leading me, actually just telegraph that to me. Like
Right,
telegraph your process to us of, hey, you know what? I'm going to
right.
gather. Listen, it's going to be last minute, but I promise I'm actually not going to let us. I'll pull the trigger. And so then, because as well, if they have a condition that will change what last minute feels, they're more likely to tell you, well, listen, your last minute's going to be here, but that means I got to do this, and that will at least help you know. Oh, I got to pull the trigger faster.
And I
If
think a
you,
lot of what, yeah, sorry, I was gonna say
yeah,
it's been really helpful to give athletes options when we talk about it. So I'm saying,
yes,
here's all the information we have. We've got option A, we've got option B, we've got option C.
mm-hmm,
We're not sure which one is the best yet.
you're right,
And so we're still gathering information. So this is what you
yep,
got so far. Here's where we're
yep,
going.
yeah,
Which one looks good to you? What do you think? What do we need? And so just kind of building all those
yep,
options out
yeah,
is,
and
I guess, how we've handled that a bit. And so, and like you
yeah.
said, telegraphing the options, but then maybe we're not pulling the trigger on the option
Yep. And
until
inviting
it.
that and inviting them to that feedback. Some people, a lot of people will assume, oh, you're the boss. You don't necessarily want my thoughts. Whereas in fact, you are probably more open to actual information than most people would be, especially at your
Right.
level. Because it's not ego for you in that moment. It's more, oh, no, it's another piece of data. And so the ability to kind of telegraph the timing, telegraph how much you enjoy it, and go, listen, the decision's not made, and I may not choose your option, but I would love to have your thoughts. And if I think it gets us there, at the end of the day, I'm gonna want to win. I'm gonna want to do what creates the greatest impact. Just know that I'd rather have your feedback than not.
Yeah.
In some
No,
ways.
and that makes sense to me. That I I've had a few employees mention, that they do appreciate that. I guess being open to
Yeah.
ideas, because there's a lot of idea. I might maybe
Yeah.
my gut feeling is like, oh, I hate this idea, but then in my head I'm like, but I, maybe it's a good idea. I don't know, and so I got to explore it and look at it, and even if put my
Yeah.
like ego aside, like you said, or it's like even if I think this is a terrible idea,
Yeah.
if it is actually a good idea, then I'd be willing to do it if it's
Right.
going to get us to the end result that we all want, right?
And that ends up being the key, right? For strategic is that immature, when we're young strategic, we solve the problem right in front of our nose. We solve the problem we know the fastest. The challenge in the evolution of maturity of strategic is recognizing that, okay, yes, I know which lane of traffic is going faster in a given moment, but when is the best time to get off the highway? Because no amount of changing lanes is going to actually solve it. And so that's the right thing of going, for you, if you find that you're having to just pivot so much, after a while, letting your brain go, wait a minute, do I actually not need to be driving this road right now? What's the right problem to solve? And being able to
Yeah.
pull back and give yourself that space. And so no, but you'll feel it, because otherwise when you're clear on the problem to be solved, it literally feels almost too quick. It's almost like instinct. It's just like breathing. It's like people will say,
Yeah.
well, go think about it. And you're like, I don't need to. When you are like, wait a minute, there's too much switching happening. There's too much pivot. There's too many pivots
Yeah.
happening too quick. Something isn't clear about, it's not the right problem. The right problem is not yet in focus in some ways.
Yeah. And understand, and a lot of times it's certain things, it's like, well, is this even a problem?
Yeah,
Seems like a problem, but maybe it's not even a problem
right.
in the
It's just,
end, which
it's
is,
actually a pause. It's not worth this. It's not
and then
worth us
and
diving
I'm
into
always
it.
looking for patterns, pattern thinking
Yep.
back, or patterns of how things have gone, and kind of trying to foresee what's
Yeah.
coming, I guess, with when it's maybe
Yeah.
a lot of interference or, yeah.
And as you're stepping into, as you're leading a team, as you're leading a team of coaches and of athletes, but especially with coaches and staff you have to deal with from the NGB and others, the more you can, because the more you can articulate milestones or things that you see as problems to be, hey, here's the problem I'm solving for, put it in those frameworks. Because so much of what you're doing is intuitive, Sco. It's so much of it is it's something that is in your gut and is obvious, but it may not always come out of your mouth. And so they
Yeah.
may be, and so especially leadership structures, people have expectations that they won't say, that it's going to be a certain way and you're going to hit certain deadlines and say certain things to go, well, you know what? I'm going to solve for this. And then after that happens, I'm going to gather information, I'm going to solve for this. And then after that, I'll get you back on what our 3 priorities will be and how we want to message that, or how we want to talk to donors about this, or how we want to line up these talking points to the organization. Being able to kind of lay out your process of gathering, clarifying targets, and then prioritizing targets, that'll be hyper intuitive. Anything you can do to express that to both your coaches, athletes, and people you report to is just going to let them be on that journey and actually get in the way less by asking
sure.
questions that actually just get in the way.
And that's probably one of the biggest things I've like tried to work on and get better at is that communication piece around that of, you can never over communicate. And sometimes there is so much going on in my head, but it doesn't come out. And so I've really tried to get better at that over the years of,
Yeah. So when
letting
people
people
see, because
know.
when people wonder about your time, why isn't he diving into this? The ability to go, well, listen, this is the problem I think is really out there. So this thing is actually here. I'm solving for that. Hearing them hearing you describe the problem you're solving for. So you don't have to go over communicate on everything. Communicate on the problem you're solving for. Communicate on how you're going to gather, and communicate then on the nuance of something. If you're delaying, you're like,
Right.
there's something missing. Those 3 beats alone, people will actually leave you alone more often. I would make up in my own head
Yeah.
to be free. Man, it's just, I appreciate making time for me, because I think one, I love what you're doing. I'm excited for you guys. I think it's going to be a great year for you again, as you're really kind of ramping up. But what your sport is so, it's this equal part mix of athleticism and art, and just this absolute creativity of choice and expression, and the amount of resilience. Watching your coaches have to really reach beyond themselves as they're talking to athletes, because they aren't just doing what they would do naturally. They're meeting athletes who all have different personalities and strengths and come from different experiences. It's really fascinating. And so I love chatting, and I can see how you've allowed them to be that, because you yourself bring a real creativity to what you do. So I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. Really, really enjoy chatting with you. And yeah, no, again, very,
Always
very
dive into the
lucky.
strength stuff. Me and my strengths talks.
I love it. It's so relatable. And, there's so much, again, with that process oriented piece, a lot of it does just come back to such basics or,
Yeah.
values and pieces there where kind of your anchors of you can always come back to and say, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And, that's kind of the driving force or
Yeah.
the beacon of light that you're following. And,
Yeah. I love anything that gives us language to describe those key pieces. It's that language part. So if you guys are watching along, and you'll see down in the description of this podcast episode, there's a link. And if you would like one of these things we're doing, the team is putting together what we call navigation briefs. All you got to do is drop in your name and email, your top 5 themes and a problem you're solving, and we'll actually send you a custom video to kind of help figure out how you use your strengths. Kind of like I talked to Scogan about this, just a little ways to get you started. If you're navigating something, we'd love to have anything. Just trying to be helpful. Drop that link there. Skogen, man, I appreciate your time. Thanks for making time for me today, and look forward to chatting again soon.
always a pleasure. Thanks,
Thanks,
Mike.
everybody. Thanks, guys. See you next time.